Okay, so I'm here to talk to you guys about creating an effective literary analysis assignment, and we're going to focus this on what I feel like is my strength, and that's literary analysis for AP Literature and Composition. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on reviewing aspects of analytical writing, and we're going to closely read an example of analytical writing. We're going to identify analytical writing elements as well as strengths and weaknesses in these essay examples, and then you guys are going to get a chance to brainstorm some topics for an analytical essay in your own classrooms. So what analytical writing is it requires students to closely read major literary works and then craft a piece of writing that takes an in-depth look at that literature. So like the themes, the characterization, everything that can be drawn from it. And it focuses particularly on patterns in literature, whether it connects to other literature or what patterns they notice within that major literary work itself. And the purpose of the writing assignment is for them to draw a conclusion on their own regarding either the author's purpose for the work or the theme or something like that. Go on. So these are the skills that I'm looking for when I give these kind of assignments to my students. I want to see that they have a thorough understanding of literary terminology and that they know how to use it when they're discussing literary works. I want to know that they can notice patterns in literature. And what I mean when I say patterns in literature is we use a book called How to Read Literature Like a Professor by Thomas C. Foster in our AP Lit class. And he talks about all the different kinds of patterns that you notice in literature. So I asked them to use that as their resource for that aspect. And then ability to make connections between different pieces of literature. Thomas Foster says that all literature is basically the same story extended, and so making those connections between those patterns in different works. And then I also want them to be able to identify and discuss themes in literature, and this one's particularly difficult for high school students because they tend to think that a theme and a moral is the same thing. So they want to get the lesson. What am I supposed to learn from this? What am I supposed to do from this book? And that's not really the point. It's about identifying what observation does this work make about human nature in general. And again, Foster's novel really helps the students when it comes to this. Go on. So the next thing I gave you guys, and it's on a green sheet, it says analysis paper, quarter 3 independent reading project. If you want to look at that, we're going to look at an example of this kind of writing assignment and just break it down, and then we'll talk about some things that you can think about when you're crafting your own. So the first thing that you need to think about is there's two different approaches to teaching writing. There's a rules-based approach and there's a context-based approach. The rules-based approach, as you can see, it focuses on explicit writing rules and conventions, and then the context-based approach focuses on analyzing texts that use these conventions effectively. There's a lot of research about these two different kinds of approaches to teaching writing, and the research supports the idea that the context-based approach for high school age students is more effective in getting the information to them. So that means that you give them examples of what you're wanting. You show them like an ideal example of what you want them to produce for you, and then they learn from that. So that's the first thing that we need to think about. The next thing is to focus on allowing student choice. There's so much research out there about how important it is to allow students the opportunity to choose certain aspects of their learning. So there's a lot of different ways we can do this as teachers. So we can allow them to choose from different prompts, which we do that in AP Lit a lot. We can allow them to choose the novel that they're reading, which in this assignment that you're looking at now, that was what they got to do. They had 4 dystopian future novel choices that they could choose from. Or you can, which was also an option in this assignment I gave you, is allow them the option of how to tackle their thesis. Give them a kind of broader option for that. So if you look at your example, so what I've done is the top part just talks about their due date and how they turn it in. Then I give them their book choices. But I give them an outline of what I want their paper to show me. So first of all, I ask for an introduction. I tell them I want the novel's title, the author, basic information. And then I want a thesis statement. So this is the most important piece of their analytical writing. I want a definitive statement that reveals an interpretation of the work that I've asked them to study or that they've chosen to study. So this is basically an opinion about the work, and they get to choose how they want that to look, that all the rest of the sections of the paper support. So The examples I've given them, the broad examples I've given them are: the thesis may make a qualitative statement about the work's place in literary history, an appraisal of the novel's theme, particularly as that theme may relate to subsequent paragraphs of the paper. But the main point is that this thesis is the controlling idea that is the focus of the rest of the entire paper. Then I ask them to kind of ease into it. So I want to see that they know how to analyze the passages in their novel. So I ask them to take a piece out of the novel, just a short passage, and analyze the author's writing style in that passage. On a kind of a mechanical level, like sentence structure, diction, these are all like those literary terms that we make sure that they understand in AP Lit. Things like that. And they should analyze a specific tone in the passage, because tone helps them understand what the author's purpose is or what the theme is. Then I ask them to connect their novel to Foster's novel, How to Read Literature Like a Professor. So each chapter in Foster's novel identifies a different pattern in literature. One chapter is dedicated to vampire characters. Another chapter is dedicated to allusions to the Bible, and then allusions to Shakespeare. And there's, I think, like 24 chapters in the book that each identify a different major pattern that most major literary works follow or include. And so I ask them to choose a chapter that has a pattern that they can identify in their novel, and then just analyze it, connect it to that chapter, find the patterns, and show how that relates to the theme, their thesis, and the author's purpose. The next section, they have to find a critical essay on their novel. So this is the part that I would have done before we started writing. Like I told you guys, it helps them to see an example of what I want them to do for me first. So we would use our library's connection to JSTOR, the research database, and I would have them find some sort of critical analysis of the novel that they're reading and look at it as an example. And then in this section of their paper, they'll identify what the thesis of that critical analysis is, the example that they already looked up. And then they just write a paragraph where they compare their thesis to that one, and they explain whether or not they agree with it, how it relates to their thesis. That way they can connect the sample that they've looked at before to what they're doing now, and it gives them some focus for their paper. Then I ask them to write, the final section is a theme analysis section. It's kind of like what they've been building up to with their thesis the entire time. This is what shows me that they fully understand all the pieces of analytical writing that we talked about earlier. So I want them to tell me what the theme is. What observations does the novel make about the human condition, about human nature? What was the author's purpose in writing the novel? And I've given them, you can look at their, I mean, obviously you can't click on the links on the piece of paper, but I give this document to them electronically, and there are links to examples of theme statements and how they can craft a theme statement and figure out how to build their paragraph after that. So then they have just their conclusion that ties everything up, their works cited page, and then they're done. If you look at the little grid sheet that I gave you, and I apologize that the font is so small, but this is the rubric that I give them. So the things that I focus on in my rubric are organizational development and focus, if their paper stuck to their thesis the entire time. And then I give a separate grade or a separate part of the rubric for each other section of the paper. So the passage analysis, their connection to Foster's novel, the critical essay analysis, and the theme analysis. And then there's a section for form and conventions like general mechanics, MLA format, that kind of thing. And you can kind of look at that on your own time as you will. But you can go on to the next one. So some other things to consider when we're assigning these kinds of things is, okay. So first of all, and this is the hardest thing for us to do, I know, because we talk about it in here all the time, but teacher feedback. So if we want them to learn, especially at the beginning of the year, so I've also given you guys each a different example of a student analysis essay for my class. And the example that I've given you is from the very first one they did at the beginning of the year. And so in order for them to learn from that, because they're working on another one right now, it's important for me to give them feedback that allows them enough time to use that feedback on their next analysis project. Now, we did this first essay that you've got in front of you back in like October, and now it's April and we're doing the next one. So that gave me plenty of time to give them plenty of feedback on that first one before we do the next one. But it is important. That's another research-approved thing. There's actually been some research that has proven that electronic feedback, teachers are more likely to give more feedback more quickly if they do it electronically. So if we use Google Classroom and Google Docs, that kind of thing. I'm going to go to the next one. Another thing that you can think about is whether or not you want to make it a collaborative assignment. So there is some research that proves that collaborative writing can promote deeper learning and encourage students' creativity and their critical thinking. So that's something you can think about, especially when it comes to teacher feedback. This could be really important. Go on. Gives you less essays to grade. You can also decide if you want to do it in or out of class. So ELL students, if you have a lot of those, in class time would be helpful. But if you have all AP students, you may want to assign it only outside of class. And then if you want to allow them time to revise it and rewrite it in any way. Again, if you're going to do this, the timely feedback thing is important, or this step is kind of useless. So if you're not going to be able to get it back to them in time, then you may want to save this until after you're done. Okay? So where we start is, like I said before, letting them look at an example. So I've given you guys each an example, and you can click next. I'm going to give you a minute to just read the first paragraph and identify the thesis of the essay I've given you. I might give you a little bit less than a minute because I'm running out of time. You can click to the next slide. And then what I'm going to do with the last few minutes is I want you to take that thesis, and we're running out of time, but what I would have you do is just identify the elements of analytical writing in that paper, look at the strengths and weaknesses, and then talk to the partner sitting next to you about it. And then once you do that, I would have you guys brainstorm your own analytical writing topics. We're running out of time, so I will let you guys do that after I turn the camera off. But that's the gist of this, is to get an idea of what analytical writing is, look at examples of it, ensure that we know that the students need to see those examples too before they start writing. They need time to brainstorm before they start writing, and it's helpful to have a companion text like Thomas Foster's novel to help them as they go through. But if I have any questions. Okay, thanks guys.